Welcome to the Insum Insider.
Welcome to the Inside. This is the Insum Insider, your source for Oracle APEX tips, techniques, methodology, and really wherever that discussion takes us. I'm your host, Monty Latchley, coming to you from the hurricane-ravaged Gulf Coast, where we're somewhere in the vicinity of Houston, Texas. With me today is my good friend and member of the Insum family, Michelle Scamity. Hello, Michelle.
Hey, Monty.
At the helm. Keeping us on time and task is our producer, French-Canadian Mark Rule. Mark, we appreciate everything you do for us. It's Thursday, October 29th, episode 20. And thank you for spending a piece of your afternoon with us. Coming to you today through the miracle of StreamYard. StreamYard, if you like, we seem to have gotten great feedback from last Insum Insider. Everybody seems to like the new look and feel. So thank you for setting all that up, Michelle. I think so far it's been very much a positive.
Mm-hmm. One thing I would like to say, though, is it leaves us a little bit blind in terms of who's joining, because when we were doing it with Zoom, we could see everybody. So if you're here, we'd love for you to pop in the comments and say hi. Let us know where you're joining us from, just to let us know that we aren't just talking amongst the four of us here. Well, two for now.
Yeah. Now you, I don't know, you're north of the border there. You may not be aware, but there's an upcoming election.
Oh, we're aware. We've got, we're keeping our eye on things.
Well, whatever side you're on, I think we can all agree that we will be so happy to rid ourselves of those political ads. I mean, they are everywhere. You can't escape them. I mean, there's the signage, the radio ads, the TV ads. I will be so happy to see November 4th. I can't tell you.
Well, yes, we are watching with great interest, and I guess all we can say is, guys, get out there and do your civic duty and vote, right? The world is watching. Yeah,
they say you can't complain if you don't vote. So if you want to maintain the right to complain, get out there and vote.
There you go. I love it. Look at all these people joining. Hey, everyone. Thank you for, Monty, if we do nothing else right, this StreamYard has been great fun. Look at Roger's joining too.
Yeah, this is we took a chance because we had a successful platform with Zoom, but you thought this would be a better experience, and so far it's really proven out to be so.
Great. Well, shall we get on with things? Yeah.
Let's do it. I know he's got a lot of content to show, so let's get right to it. We're joined today by Vincent Morneau. He really, if you're into APEX, you already know who Vincent is. He's very visible in the community. He speaks at the conferences. He puts a lot of content out online. He's brought some really incredible tooling to the community. APEX CL, Nitro, among others. We've titled this session APEX and JavaScript the right way, and I don't want to assume that I've been doing it the right way all along. But so he's gonna get into the details. Thank you so much for joining us, Vincent.
You haven't, Monty. You haven't.
Okay, I trust you're right about that. Now, the right way. What is the wrong way? If you could get into that.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, I'm glad to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun, and as Monty said, I've got a lot of content. I don't know how much time this will take. We'll try to get it done in an hour. So yeah, JavaScript the right way. But really today we're going to talk about all sorts of front-end technology, so CSS, JavaScript, and other languages that I'm going to introduce. And I know some of you are going to say it's maybe preposterous to say what's the right way. There's no right way. Well, I can tell you there's a lot of wrong ways. And unfortunately, in the world of APEX, which is very database-centric, people are used to SQL and PL SQL. Whenever we have to do a bit of CSS or a bit of JavaScript, I see a lot of wrong. I see so many opportunities to improve the methodology for front-end development. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. It is one way. It is, in my opinion, the best way. And you guys will feel free to use it or don't.
I'd actually love, as you're going through your presentation, to hear from people who are watching their thoughts and if they agree with you or not. And hopefully we can have some lively conversation.
Absolutely. So let's just start, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. I have no PowerPoints, no nothing. It's going to be all demos, and a lot of it is going to be my first time. So I'll just cross fingers.
And so will we.
Yeah.
Hearing that.
We like operating without a net here.
Yep. Let me know, Vincent, when you're ready. I think I need to see your screen. But I think I don't see your screen share yet. So if you can just.
How about now?
I see it. You're
Perfect.
all set.
Okay, so here's a very typical Apex application that I created this morning. It's got 2 pages, standard universal theme stuff. So it's got nothing. It's an empty shell of an app, as you can see. And we know Apex is this great low-code framework in which you often don't have to code anything. But in many customer projects, when you have to meet requirements, it's inevitable that in your career, you're going to have to write a little bit of JavaScript or a little bit of CSS to meet what the requirements are in your project. Because that's what the web development is for. It uses massive amounts of JavaScript and CSS to generate what you see on the screen. You can't get around that. So when you have to write some of those languages yourself, Apex presents a few methods to do so. So for instance, you would go to one of your page properties, such as this one, and there's a section right here in which you can write, you can actually reference JavaScript files, you can write JavaScript functions yourself, and you can execute JavaScript code when the page loads. Same thing for CSS. You can write a bunch of inline CSS here that will apply to your page. But that's not all, because this is just one way. You can also put JavaScript in dynamic actions. So here's a dynamic action that I could create that runs on page load. And the action would be execute JavaScript code, and you could put something in here. And as your application grows, as you get tens or hundreds of pages, that happens. You put all those bits of code all across the app, and it becomes really quickly a confusing mess. So this is what I'm talking about the wrong ways, is to be able to write lines of codes all across your app in dynamic action, in page properties, in templates, and eventually you're just lost. You don't know where your code is. It becomes very hard to maintain, and you've essentially created a technical debt on your project. And on top of that, the problem with JavaScript as a language is that this is not a compiled language. JavaScript is actually interpreted at runtime. So that means you can write whatever you want in those boxes. Let's do this. So I know what I'm doing. This is not JavaScript, but the Apex engine, well, let me remove the dynamic action first. The Apex engine will not verify if your JavaScript is valid or not. It will just take it, save it, run it, and now I get an error at the bottom in my developer toolbar because, of course, this was not valid JavaScript. I'm getting an uncaught syntax error. unexpected identifier. So this is expected, and there's no way really to validate your JavaScript prior to running your app. And that's a problem because a lot of the JavaScript will fail as you go through your processes and you click on buttons. So it's very easy to miss things. So let's delete that line of code here. So a couple of years ago, when I got into JavaScript and front-end technology, I got to learn tools that turned JavaScript into something that you could compile first. So at least you would get some kind of syntax checker or quality check before you even send your JavaScript to your browser, much like packages and views, everything that we're used to in Oracle database technology. And that concept of compiling front-end JavaScript and CSS is mostly used through the concept of a build tool. A build tool is something that will bundle all your JavaScript and CSS together and create an output that your web application can consume. So a build tool is essentially a compiler of some sorts. And of course, if you are to use a build tool, you're not going to sprinkle code all across your application like this. You're going to store your code in files. And those files are going to be compiled by the build tool and then sent to your web application. So a couple of years ago, I got to learn all these concepts, and I created a build tool for Apex called APEX Nitro. APEX Nitro has been around for a while, and it essentially did that in some ways. Taking your JavaScript together and your CSS, sanitizing the code, and then sending it back to Apex. That was essentially the concept of APEX Nitro. And today, I'm happy to announce that the latest version, version 5, which is the latest in 2 years, has been released. So I want to take some time today to explain how do we use APEX Nitro with Apex and how it will help improving your CSS and JavaScript methodology when you're doing Apex development.
And can I just say, Vincent, you actually won an innovation award for Nitro a couple of years ago, did you not?
That's right. So APEX Nitro has won an innovation award at Kscope of 2017 already. So it's been a while.
Did Nitro win, or you won the innovation award?
All
right, that's okay. I'm putting you on the spot. Go ahead.
Vincent Morneau for APEX Nitro. That's what it says.
There you go.
So a little bit of both.
I think this is exciting news that you have this new version coming out and all that. I think the last one was on GitHub. I think it was 4.16 or something like that. What was the real catalyst for a new version? Was it changes to the JavaScript language that you needed to adapt Nitro to, or was it some functionality did you have some voids that you filled in with this version of Nitro, or what?
That is a good question, and I could expand in very different ways. But essentially, it's that I wanted to make APEX Nitro much more flexible to the user. APEX Nitro in previous versions was really stuck into a very specific template. So with the latest version that I'm going to show today, you're free to create templates and leverage the latest versions of JavaScript that are available today on the market, such as ES6, ES8, and a lot more.
Maybe some of that stuff will become clearer as you go through your presentation.
Yes, and also I want to make today a session that is useful for anyone that never used APEX Nitro. So I'm not going to highlight the differences between previous versions and now. I'm going to start from scratch.
If you're on the Facebook or the or the chat on YouTube. If you're using Nitro right now, add to the comments. I'm interested to see if this is a lot of new information for the community, or if these are people who are already using the tool and are just wanting to get more information around it.
That's right. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is, of course, installing APEX Nitro. And this is very simple. Now, you can, Michelle, if you can put the link on the screen.
Yep.
I want to share the GitHub link to everyone. This is the main hub for everything about APEX Nitro. It contains the documentation, an issue log, change log, everything, a bunch of examples too. So everything that you need to know is here on the GitHub link. And I'm going to start with the first step, which is about installing APEX Nitro. The only thing that you need to have prior to installing APEX Nitro is Node.js. So Node.js is the platform on which APEX Nitro runs. It's something you can install with a download link. You go through the steps and you're done. Node.js is really simple to install. So I'll skip that step right now and get directly to installing APEX Nitro. So
can I just ask a very silly,
yes.
Will this work on Mac and Windows equally?
It works on Mac, Windows, Linux, everything. It's
okay.
All compatible with all platforms.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so let's start here. And I'm actually going to have to uninstall APEX Nitro first to get back to basics. Okay, so here we are. APEX Nitro is a command line tool. So as a command line tool, you have access to command line commands through here. So I open a terminal on my system, and what I would want to do for using APEX Nitro is just typing APEX Nitro. But now, of course, it will not work because I haven't installed it yet. What we want to do for installing it is call the npm, the Node Package Manager command that's available with Node.js, and then you do install APEX Nitro, and we'll add a flag, the G, that stands for global. So that means we're installing APEX Nitro globally on your system. It's going to be available everywhere you open a command line on. So that takes a couple of seconds. It installs all the dependencies that APEX Nitro needs. It's also much lighter than previous versions. So for those of you who were worried about the APEX Nitro size, it's about 40% of the previous size. So now npm installs all the dependencies for APEX Nitro. We're just going to let it finish. Okay. So now APEX Nitro 5.02 is installed, and I should have access to the APEX Nitro command. So if I type APEX Nitro now, I see that there's something going on. And there's a bunch of options and commands that are available to me now because APEX Nitro is installed. So the first thing that we want to do is basically connect APEX Nitro to an existing APEX application and start from there. So APEX Nitro offers a command called init that initializes a project inside APEX Nitro. So we're going to do this. And I created a folder. I'm going to back up here. So cd. Okay, so I created a folder called Powerful App. And in that folder here, there's essentially nothing. We're going to open it up in Visual Studio Code. This would be essentially a normal Git repository where I would have folders such as Apex for my application exports, maybe a couple of packages, I'll add some views. So this is what a typical Git repository for Apex projects look like. And what is missing here in the context for front-end development is that we want to also add a couple of CSS and JavaScript files that would be bundled with our Apex application. So I like to use a folder called www, but this could really be anything. And this is where I would put my front-end development files. So now in my going back to my command line, I'll go to this folder, and I will initialize my APEX Nitro project. So the first thing that we're asked for is what kind of mode do you want to use for APEX Nitro? APEX Nitro v5 offers two modes. One, basic for first-time users. This is the quickest way to get started. You can get a really functional app going in a couple of minutes. So I suggest using the basic mode for first-time users. Or if you want to get your front-end methodology to the next level, I suggest you use the Pro. Today we're going to look at both. But let's start with the basic mode. So APEX Nitro asks me for the name of my project. I'll just call it the Powerful App. The URL for my application, let's just copy this right here. And then 3 files were created, one for the configuration, one for the credentials, and one other for the Git repository. Let's look at what's been created under www now. So the 3 files for configuration, but we're also presented with a default source folder that contains a default JavaScript file and a default CSS file. So this is just for templating purposes. It really doesn't have anything of value to you except for maybe the structure. So this structure essentially uses a namespace methodology, a couple of modules for the different pages of your application, for instance, page 1, page 2, and functions inside of those modules. And then we have a bunch of code that would run on page load for all of these functions. So I'm going to explain. I'm going to show what it does later. And we also have a CSS file that only puts a color to the main element of our page. Okay, so what's next? What we want to do now is we want to take those files, those CSS and JavaScript files from our local system, from here, to our Apex application in order to leverage the full power of file-based development. So to do this, we're going to have to connect APEX Nitro to our Apex application. To do this, we're going to go to our application under shared components. And to initialize the connection, we're going to go to application process and create an application process. Let's call it APEX Nitro, but it can be anything. I like to put it the very first process that happens on the page. So that way APEX Nitro is initialized before everything else. This is also a non-load process. And the code that I want to put here is basically the connection between my local system and the Apex application. So the code is very simple. You can find it in the documentation, and it's about replacing the gflow images substitution string from Apex, which basically means the static files. These are the static files, and we want to override this to use APEX Nitro service variable. This is something you only have to do once, because once it's done, then you have connected your application and you don't have to worry about it ever again. I'm going to add a condition here that is about only running this process if the service of APEX Nitro is running. So that should be it. Now my application is connected to APEX Nitro. The only piece that's missing is, of course, referencing the files in our application. So as you've seen here, I've got powerfulapp.css and powerfulapp.js. They both contain some code, but they need to be ported over to APEX. So let's just go to the user interface attributes. This is one of my favorite locations to reference my files because they're now available across my entire APEX application. And what I will do here is reference the app image substitution string powerfulapp.js, and same thing for CSS here. So this is powerfulapp.js, powerfulapp.css. They will reference my local files from here. I apply changes. And now the setup is done. Everything we were doing is only a setup. You set up it once and that's all.
Hey, Vincent, quick question. Everything that you just showed, the basic, the pro, all that, was that part of 416 or is this some of
No,
the
this is entirely new.
Okay.
And the goal with the basic and pro was to offer different modes for a user because APEX Nitro was criticized before for being too hard to use at first. So now with the basic mode, as you're going to see soon, it's very, very easy. You only do this setup once, and you're going to get your files rolling back and forth between your local system and APEX application. Super simple and great for first-time users. Okay, so now my setup is done. Let's run my page. I'm going to go back to my command line, and now let's look at the other available options for APEX Nitro. What I'm going to want to do now is the launch command, which basically takes your files from your local system and they send it through APEX. So let's just do APEX Nitro launch. Now what APEX Nitro is doing is it's compiling the files and it's sending it to APEX. So let's look at the console, because one of our files in our JavaScript was essentially displaying some console information. Hello from page 1. If I'm going to page 2, I'm going to get hello from page 2. That is coming from our JavaScript file locally. From here, hello from page 1, hello from page 2. And also the CSS file puts a white background behind the body of the page. So let's spice things up and let's change some of those values. So instead of having a white background, let's put something like a hot pink background for the main element. And I also want to change hello from page 1. Well, actually, let's just append some more things.
Hey, Vincent, another question, because I've been, Vincent?
Work. Yep.
I've been doing JavaScript the wrong way, so I have these questions. Whenever you did the launch, did that physically move those files up to the server, or you're still working on local versions of those files?
Right. So it's a very good question. I was going to get to that if you give me 2 minutes.
Sure.
So now I want to save those changes locally. Remember, this is on my system.
Mm-hmm.
I added a line in JavaScript and I changed my CSS. So in the top right, there's a little notification that says APEX Nitro noticed the change. It pushed it to APEX again. So now let's look at our application again. I get this hot pink background, and I also get this new line that I added locally. So there's a live change going on, and we can see it better if I split the screen in 2. So let me
So
do
without
that.
having to go through that whole save it, upload it,
Save
rerun
it,
your
upload it.
page. Okay.
Exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
So this happens in real time. So let's do this now with the screen side by side, and change the main background to something like a yellow green. And I haven't saved yet, so I'll just press save. APEX Nitro detects the change and sends it back in real time. Same thing for a JavaScript. I'll add a third one.
So you can see if you've got tons of
think it
CSS
works.
tweaks to be doing, this would be a huge time save.
Could be a huge time
Yeah.
save. So because of the setup at first, I know some people are going to say this is too complicated, but if you think in the long term, this is a huge time saver. I'm just writing my code in my local code editor, and the synchronization is done automatically. So here is my third line of JavaScript. Okay. So to answer your question, Monty, are those files being sent to APEX in real time? The answer is no. We're essentially working with a proxy version of our application. So as you see, this is my real URL right here, but APEX Nitro opens a proxy that runs on localhost with a customized port. And it mirrors my application, but injects the code on it. So that is what makes the automatic sync running. And also, I want to take a few steps back and go back to my application builder, go to shared components, and look at my static application files. This is essentially empty now, which is weird because I do have files sent to my browser right here. So these powerful app.js or CSS files should be with my application too. They should be in here. So this launch methodology and live coding is useful as you code, as you try some things and as you go through your changes. But at the end of your day, or at the end of your code, what you want to do is send the code to APEX in the static application files too, so that it lives in the shared component, and so that it is available to anyone else accessing the application through the real URL. So to do this, we're going to use another APEX Nitro command called upload. Okay, so I'm going to exit the command line here. Now it's no longer synchronizing automatically, and we're going to use this command called upload. So what the upload command is doing is it's taking the files from the local system and it's sending it to Oracle and uploading it to the static application files. Now it's not working, and I expected this because there's a file that you need to configure. You need to indicate to APEX Nitro where to send the files. So in my code editor now, let's look back at how the configuration files were generated. I've got the APEX Nitro config JSON, which holds all the information about my application name, the URL, the port that we want to use. There's also a separate file called APEX Nitro cred.json that contains the information to connect to your database for uploading the files. So by default, APEX Nitro will generate a template for this file with dummy data for username, password, and connection strings. Now I'm going to replace this in my other screens so you don't look at my username and password. So I'll close this and do this change in a separate window.
Hey, Vincent, while you do, I just wanted to mention there's a comment that's come in asking about version control. I think it's something that you were going to touch on a little bit later, but just giving you a heads up, people are asking about version control.
Of course.
Actually, Neelish specifically is asking about version control.
Okay, I'll touch on it.
Great, thanks.
After this. So now I've entered my username, password, and connection string in this cred file here. And if I run my APEX Nitro upload again, now something different is going to happen. This takes a little while because it actually uploads all the files from the source folder in APEX. Okay, so it's done. I see that powerful app.css and JS were uploaded. And let's actually have a look here. So my shared component static application file section was empty. Let's refresh this. Now both files are here. And if I run my application through the real URL, now my changes apply.
Okay.
So Vincent, you were working, let's say, all day on your local versions of this, and then at the end of the day, you said, I'm going to go ahead and upload, and then that moves those files physically onto the server, and you're not using the local files anymore. When you start working again tomorrow morning, do you need to blow those files away to go back to using your local versions of those CSS and JavaScript files?
It's a great question, and it also connects to Neelish, a question on version control. So now that you're working in a file-based methodology for CSS and JavaScript, everything that lives here should be ideally on version control. So you want to put this on a Git repository that everyone in your team is working on. So as you're starting your day in the morning, you refresh your Git repository and you get the latest changes that are coming from other people onto the CSS and JavaScript file. And what you're doing during your day is basically working on your own version of those files. And at the end of the day, it all merges together as version control is so good at. So I'm reading a question now. Should we? Okay. So locally changing code and see it reflecting in live doesn't upload these files physically to the static workspace or application file. That's right. So the live change that's happening when I ran the launch command doesn't upload any file. It would actually be a waste of resources to upload files every time if you can see it live. The only purpose of the upload is to be able to propagate your changes to other developers in your team so that anyone with the real application link can see those changes.
And so then in a team situation where there are several of you possibly working on the same CSS and JavaScript files, then you're leveraging your version control tool to make sure you aren't overwriting each other and you're working collaboratively together then.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. So now I'm going to move on from basic mode to pro mode. And this is where APEX Nitro really becomes super powerful.
I feel like that deserved a sound effect of some sorts.
Next time, Michelle.
All right.
So let's remove all those files from here. We're going to start from scratch. I'm going to APEX Nitro init a new project. But this time I'm going to use the pro mode. So this is APEX Nitro init. And let's pick pro. So as you enter pro mode, the first thing you're asked is to pick a template. Now with APEX Nitro v5, we're going to offer only one default template, but we've created this architecture in which we could be creating different templates in the future. Templates are sort of like what you've seen with the JavaScript file before, where you have the namespace and the page. And so this is a template that we offer. And it's really useful when you start a project because you don't have to remember how to structure your files. So with APEX Nitro, we will offer a default template, but you can also create your own, publish your own template, and use it with Nitro Pro. But anyway, let's pick default now. And this takes a little more time because we're installing a bunch of dependencies. So the dependencies are packages that will help you get advanced JavaScript and advanced CSS running in your project. So now let's answer the questions. We're going to go with the library name is Powerful App. And then we're asked to pick a CSS preprocessor or processor. So that is about the language, the style sheet language that you want to use. Most of you are probably familiar with CSS, plain and simple, which is a bunch of rules that you define to create visuals, properties to your application. But there are other types of languages such as Sass, Less, and Stylus, which allows you to do much more advanced CSS stuff. So for the sake of this demo, I'm going to pick Sass here. So Sass will replace CSS as the language, style sheet language. Okay, so the URL of my app, let's put that again. I've got a bunch more settings that I'm all going to put to default. Again, default. The configuration files were created, so I can go back and edit them or verify if the configuration is fine. I'm already going to replace what's been inserted in the cred file, so give me a second here to insert my real credentials.
Vincent, I'm going to put up another question. Feel free to push it to later, but Angel is asking about hierarchical folders when you push them to the static files.
That's a great question, and this is where APEX Nitro Pro really shines. You'll see in a second.
Good timing on that question, Angel, then.
So as you can see, the installation takes a little longer because we're installing packages from open source projects such as the Sass dependency and also others that will allow us to write much more modern code that we were using with the basic mode. One other thing I want to say about the basic mode is that what you were seeing on the code editor is what you get on Apex. There is no processing going on. It's just taking what's there and uploading it to Apex. So there are pros and cons to this. First of all, it's fast, it's easy, but you'll see the benefits of having a compiler running on your files before uploading it to Apex. So the installation takes a while, but this is a one-time process that we don't have to do anymore. Okay, so this is done. We're gonna go back to Visual Studio Code and look at my www folder now. So you'll notice right away that there are a lot more files. All sorts of configuration files, Babel, gitignore, ESLint. So this is default stuff that in APEX Nitro comes in to help you leverage the most out of your JavaScript and CSS. I would say if you're not familiar with all those configuration files, don't even worry about it. You don't have to open them. You don't have to do anything. They're just here for APEX Nitro. But where it gets interesting is in the source folder now. So the Pro mode comes with a different set of files by default. The first one is main.js. And you have to see and understand the main.js as the main entry to your application. This is where everything comes together. The problem with writing long JavaScript files is just like packages. You want to bundle small files together that are logical with what they're dealing with. And we use the main.js file to serve all those bits and pieces together into one entrance. So in our case, we have two JavaScript files under the JS section. So this is to answer Angel's question. P1.js, it only does a console log here. P2.js only does a console log. And in my main JavaScript file, we import the code from the two files and we run it on the page. So it's very similar to what the basic mode was doing, but this allows for much more complex structure, and you'll be better off in the long term separating your files in logical sections.
Hey, Vincent, I just want to let you know that we've got probably 10, 15 minutes before the hour. If we need to, we can always schedule another session, but we need to start bringing this around and tying up some of these things. If we need more time, we can always set up another session, a deep dive.
I think I'll be good for, I've got another 10 minutes left, and then we open up for questions. Does that
Great.
work?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
That works.
Okay, and the same thing applies for the main.scss file, which imports other code from other file and serves it as the main entry point to our application. So remember these two, they're the main entry point. So now with APEX Nitro Pro initialized in our folder, we are able to leverage the modern JavaScript that the standards offer, such as import files in other files. You get all the ES6, ES8 features available from here. And APEX Nitro will compile this and serve it into the appropriate language for APEX. And also, what you have here is the ability to get error handling on your JavaScript, which you didn't before, because as I've shown in how we were coding live in APEX, you can put anything in the JavaScript properties, the page properties, and the JavaScript will fail at runtime. But in APEX Nitro Pro, if you break up your file, if you mess something up, like I'm just going to do here, I'm messing up my file here, I'm messing up my file here, and if I go back to my command line, I'll introduce you to another command, which is APEX Nitro build. And this is the biggest difference between Basic and Pro, is that you can build your files so that it compiles everything from the source and it creates a final build folder that is ready for APEX. So the build reads all the source files and it compiles them. Now I've messed them up, right? I've broken the syntax of both my files. So APEX Nitro will tell me there's a problem here in line 11 of your file main.js. And same thing for my CSS file here. So there's no way I can send a broken piece of code to my application now because there's a compiler before. It's just like the Oracle engine that runs on packages. So let's just fix that again, move this, and I'll build again. Now APEX Nitro builds my source files.
Vincent, is this different from version 4, the way errors are handled? I feel like I saw it handled differently in the earlier versions.
Well, the concept is the same, as in we're validating the code, but the engine behind APEX Nitro is completely different. APEX Nitro V5 is a complete rewrite of V4.
Okay. So Benjamin is asking about changes, and I don't know if you'll, and Monty asked earlier as well, I don't know if you'll have a chance to cover some of the differences between 4 and 5.
Right. I'll have to come back to that later.
Okay,
though.
perfect.
So now my build is complete, and the biggest difference now is that we can see it from the code editor. My source folder is intact. Nothing has been changed in here. I still get my JavaScript and CSS folder structure that are broken down like this. But now APEX Nitro created a new folder called build. And this build folder is the output from the compiling of the source folder. So we compiled source into build, and we get 4 different files. One is powerfulapp.js, which has been compiled into a big file with all the code. And the other one, which is the most useful one for production, is the powerfulapp.min.js. So that is done automatically. And you get your code on a single line that you can send to Apex, which will run in a smaller size and more efficiently. So the min file is what we want to use for production. So first of all, to do this, we're going to go back to Apex and do a small tweak to how we were referencing our files. In the share components, user interface attributes. So in here, we were referencing appimage powerfulapp.js. Let's just add the min substitution string here, which will put in production, this will do min.js, but in development, it will omit the min, so it will be just this. So very important to put this substitution string right here. Same thing for the app.css.
So this is where the performance boost comes in. Well, one of the places it comes in.
In one of the places, yes.
Yep.
Okay, so now my file has been compiled, minified, it is sanitized. We're sure there's no error. So let's launch our application again. Close this, back to command line, APEX Nitro, launch. So prior to launching, APEX Nitro builds the source to make sure we're up to date with the latest changes. And here it is. So I've got hello from P1, which is my console log running on page load. There's something I want to show. Just hold on a second. One of the powers of APEX Nitro V5 is the ability, as I've mentioned, to compile, minify, sanitize your files. But one of the problems by doing so is that you've took 5 different files, 10 different files together and made it into one. So while you're debugging, that makes it really hard to see where your code is actually coming from. But with APEX Nitro V5, what you have is the concept of source maps. Source maps is what allows you to get a tracing from your final file to your original file. So if you look at this line right here, I'm gonna make this bigger. If you look at this line, hello from P1, that is served through my single final file compiled, blah, blah, blah. It's still it still says that it's coming from p1.js. So APEX Nitro is able to map what we're serving to APEX, but for debugging purposes, it maps it to p1.js, which is my original file. This is very important for debugging, because if you were looking for your bug into this massive, let's look at what powerful app.min.js looks like. If we were looking at an issue in this code, it would be impossible. So this is why source maps are very important to map the code back to its original form. Okay, where do I go from here? Only 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I asked a question earlier, Vincent, and I said when you come back to work the next morning, do you have to blow those files that are on the server away? But I understand you're running a proxy application, so you're still able to use your local files when you get to work the next morning.
That's
and those
right.
files can stay on the server. It's just when you're running the real site up there through that main URL, you're using the ones that have already been uploaded the day before.
That's right.
Okay, I got you.
So I'll finish on something pretty cool, and then I'll open up for questions. I'm going to skip the upload step for APEX Nitro Pro. It's pretty much the same thing. You would do APEX Nitro upload, and it would take whatever is in the build folder with all the minified and compiled files, and it would send it to APEX. But I'm going to skip that step. I think you all get the concept. I'll go back to launch, and I'll show you something really cool. So with the APEX Nitro, whenever the application is launched, let's wait for it to build. Whenever the application is launched, it opens localhost port 4000, which is the proxy version of our application that uses our local files. And if I use the external link here, this is something that can be shared on your network. So instead of using the local host, let's open the external link here, and I'll send that URL to my phone. So I'm sending the URL to my phone because I'm on the same network as my phone, obviously. And now I need to put some content on this page. So let's go to page 1.
Vincent, you'll give me a heads up when you're ready to take some questions, because there's some great ones coming in.
Yes, I'm almost done. I'm
okay.
Almost done.
Yep.
So let's add some long content in here, maybe some lorem ipsum text.
I wanted to say that I'm grateful that I actually have seen some of your actual powerful apps, because otherwise I'd be very worried at what you're calling powerful app.
Yeah,
it's not blowing me away.
Understood. I'll show something else. So here's some really long content on my page. And are you able to see both my face and my screen?
We've been seeing that all along. Would you like to just show your screen?
No, it's perfect. So what I want to show here is my phone. And since I've logged on the, oops, give me one more second, I forgot something. Since I've logged on the same link with my phone and my desktop, now the two devices are synced together. So this is really great for responsive development. Is this the same link? Yes. Okay. So what I want to show is with my phone, I'm able to scroll here, and it will also scroll my desktop version.
Wow.
So both devices are synced. I can open up menus, close menus, type into forms. So the concept of this is that you could have multiple devices around you, and while you're doing development, you're also seeing in real time the changes in your devices. So let's do one more thing. One last thing here is to change the background color of my main element. So I'm changing the background color to this hot pink that I like so much. And as I save on my computer, it's also going to change on my phone. So here's, I don't know if you can see this, but the color has been changed too. So any change that you do on your files reflect on all devices. So I'm gonna end on this. Of course,
cool.
Michelle, you're right, the application is not powerful, but with this tool, we were able to create applications such as Fabi, which is a lot more interesting visually. So this is not something that you would do with traditional APEX methodology. You have to have some build tool because there's a lot of JavaScript and CSS involved in such an application. So I'm going to end here and open up for questions.
Okay. This came in when you were talking about the map file.
Yep.
So what's the answer?
Oh, I wasn't looking.
Sorry. Here we go. The performance
Doesn't
gain.
that undo the performance gain when using the minified version? It still needs to load the map file. Right, so the map file will never load in production. It will only load in development. So basically you don't, it's not a problem if your application is slowed down by a little in development, as long as you get the full benefits and performance boost in production.
Okay.
Do you always need to use the root of your Git? Yes, absolutely. You can put your folder wherever you want, as long as in your command line, you make sure to go to the appropriate folder name and do your APEX Nitro commands anywhere.
Okay.
Is it possible to make use of a combination of static workspace file and static application files? We use them both. Yes, good question. In your APEX Nitro configuration file right here, there is a section for upload destination. So this destination property, you have many different choices. You've got application that sends it to the application static file. You can also send it to workspace. There's another one for theme and plugin. So this is all documented on the repository, but the goal of this config file is that you can go back and edit it. And since it's on our Git repository, it's shared across your team, and your APEX Nitro configuration is used the same way for every developer on your team.
Getting to the end. Thanks for that, Vincent.
So are all developers forced to use APEX Nitro once configured? The answer is no, not at all. In fact, APEX Nitro should really only be used when you have to do front-end development. If you don't have to code JavaScript or CSS, don't bother launching APEX Nitro. Just make sure that by the end of your day or by the end of your development portion, you upload your files so that anyone else on your team not using APEX Nitro can also see your changes and use your the latest versions of your files. With V5, there is no UI. That's right. So for all of you V4 users, in V4 we had a nice nice UI for configuring projects. Now it's all file-based. The reason is this is much more portable and shareable than the UI we had before. So I think in the long run, you'll get used to this file-based approach.
I think that covers the rest of the last of the questions. Thank you so much. You weren't lying when you said you had a lot of material to cover,
Man.
Vincent.
I went fast.
Well, man, Vincent, you talk about for me personally, it's drinking from the proverbial fire hose here, man. That was a lot of information that we were able to get in just the hour. Thank you very, very much. You know, in preparation for the session, you know, I told you, I said, no, I don't need to worry about you showing up in a cowboy hat, and you said no, I didn't need to worry about that. So you certainly didn't disappoint there. Thank you very, very much. We had some great questions. You know, if you've got some ideas, those of you in attendance, if you've got some ideas for a future session, reach out to us. We're always looking to add to the calendar for future sessions. Michelle, what do we have upcoming on the Insum Insider?
Yeah, let me pick this up. How cool is this? All right, so our next session is going to be with Adrian and Heli. They're going to be talking about machine learning. And then the following week, we have Stephen Feuerstein talking about PL SQL and lessons learned. So you won't want to miss those. I did want to mention one other thing that we have in the works that we're kind of excited about. We have Anton and Hayden starting next week are starting a quick APEX instant tips. So every Friday at 12:05, if you like this kind of live environment and you want to come on and catch a quick tip, no longer than 5 minutes, you want to catch that. That's what we've got coming up.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I really do like the new look and feel of StreamYard. I like it. I think everyone's been real interactive here today, so that's great. Vincent, anything else before we shut this thing down?
Oh, I think you've muted.
Oh, nothing that comes to mind, but I want to support anyone on Twitter or other media for APEX Nitro. Keep the questions coming, and I'll be here.
Yeah, I think we might want to talk about doing a separate kind of webinar outside of this format, or almost a hands-on lab, because I can see where maybe some of the installation and configuration steps some people might still need some hand-holding, and we'll want to make sure that people leverage this great tool and get past some of those kind of first steps. So we'd be happy to organize something like that. So let's plan on doing something like that.
Yeah, it looks a little tedious to set it up, but once you set it up, boy, you can really, really reap the benefits. So great work, Vincent. Michelle, I say let's cue the music and let's dance on out of here. Thank you all for joining us on the inside.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to the Insum Insider.